Hello, this is Adam Carroll with Justice for All. And this show, UN This Week, will be talking about and discussing self-determination. And we're going to start with our guest, who is an expert on Kashmir. But first, to introduce the issue, um, though arising in the 19th and 20th century as a response to imperialism, the collective right to self-determination of all people was enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. However, it has been the subject of extensive debate and controversy, both about the content and the right of who can assert it. According to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, this should not be on the screen yet, just letting you know. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, all peoples have the right to self-determination, that is to freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, disposing of their natural wealth and resources. However, the principle does not state how the decision is to be made or what the outcome should be, whether independence, federation, protection, some form of autonomy, or integration. There are several organizations such as the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, or UNPO, for nations and tribes to feel they are denied equal representation in national and international governance, with members representing Catalonia, the Ogoni tribe, the Lakota Nation, and Guam, and many more. Now, looking at this, we can see how widespread these many groups are. Despite its name, UNPO is not a formal part of the UN system. It was formed in 1991 to help those who were voiceless find a voice and be listened to. This past summer, the General Secretary of the UNPO spoke about the difficulties of undertaking advocacy at UN institutions and said, the world today is a hard place for unrepresented nations and people. Just thinking about some of these groups, there is, unfortunately, authoritarian states employ a number of methods to exclude and silence such advocates, ranging from intimidation in international institutions like the UN to outright violence in their home countries. Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan are just some of the nations that are very active in harassing activists abroad. Indeed, only months ago, the Baluchi journalist and critic of the Pakistani government, Sajid Hussain, was brutally murdered in Sweden. Dolkun Issa, a Uyghur leader, has also been endlessly harassed throughout Europe because of China's abuse of Interpol red notices, with his family forced into concentration camps where his mother lost her life. And of course, we certainly cannot forget the people of Palestine, Western Sahara, and Kashmir, the subjects of today's discussion. Today we'll be speaking with two guests, and I'm very glad to welcome the first guest, Dr. Imtiaz Khan. Dr. Khan is an internationally renowned immunologist who has published close to 100 peer-reviewed manuscripts in high-impact journals. However, as an activist for independent Kashmir over the last decade, Dr. Khan has been actively involved in the struggle for independence of Jammu and Kashmir from occupation. He has spoken as an invited speaker at various events, embassies, consulates, and state capitals in support of this issue. He served on the board of Kashmir American Council since 2010 and later became its president in 2014. He is currently on the board of World Kashmir Association. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Doctor, wanted to ask you if you could give just a little background for those who don't know about how Kashmir came to be well, not just occupied, but not independent? What happened?
Actually, when in 1947, Indian subcontinent was divided into two states, India and Pakistan. And by the formula which was adopted at that time, the Muslim majority states were to be part of Pakistan, while the Hindu majority states would become India. At that time, basically, Kashmir is a Muslim majority state, but it had a Hindu Maharaja. And there were similar two examples in the Indian subcontinent, like Hyderabad and Junagadh, which had a Muslim ruler, but the majority of population was Hindu. And those two rulers wanted to accede to Pakistan, but they were not allowed to on the basis that the majority of the population are Hindus. So they had to, against their will, accede to India. By that formula, Kashmir should have been part of Pakistan. But what happened at that time? Lord Radcliffe, who was the representative of Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, they changed the maps. And one of the districts in Punjab, which is the adjoining state of Jammu and Kashmir, there's a town called Gurdaspur. We should have been gone to Pakistan, but without informing Muhammad Ali Jinnah, hiding the secrets from him, it was given to India. So India got the connection to Kashmir. They sent their troops and occupied 2/3 of Kashmir by force. The case was taken to United Nations and it was agreed upon by Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, that there will be a plebiscite held where people will vote and they will basically decide whether Kashmiris want to accede to Pakistan or want to accede to India, or they have the third option to be independent. And it was agreed upon that United Nations will appoint a representative who will conduct these elections, and results of these elections will be conveyed to United Nations, and the will of the people will be implemented. At that time, Kashmir had its own prime minister, it had its own president, and it had its own court, high court, and basically they had all the criminal code which had nothing to do with India. If any Indian wanted to travel to Kashmir, at the airport they had to pass through the custom authorities, just what happens when you land on a foreign country. But what happened? India by and by reneged from the promise. The right of self-determination was on top. And slowly and steadily, it befooled the international community. And international community or UN didn't pay any attention, although they had a UN office in both sides of the Kashmir. 1/3 of the Kashmir which is with Pakistan and 2/3 which is with India. And international community was silent to the flagrant violation which India held against the UN Charter. And by, they changed the nomenclature of the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir. They made it as a chief minister. Then the president was converted to governor like other Indian states. And then there were laws were implemented that the rule of the Supreme Court's writ will apply to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And there were peaceful demonstrations held against this changed situation by people of Kashmir. But because the world didn't pay any attention, the world was silent. So India continued with these horrible measures. In 1989 and 1990, end of 89, beginning of 90, the youth of Kashmir became very restive. They started a movement. And what India, in response to that, India unleashed the reign of terror against the people of Kashmir to basically throttle their voice. They were massacred. The armed forces, right now there are about 900 Indian forces in Kashmir. Basically, any demonstration, they sprayed them with bullets. There are several incidents, like Gaukadal, where 200 to 500 people were killed in cold blood. Then in area called Hawal, where they were taking the dead body of Maulana Farooq, who was killed by Indian intelligence agencies, and people were accompanying his body, and they were fired upon and killing hundreds of people. The women have been raped. There are yes.
I didn't mean to interrupt. We were having some sound difficulties. I think you said there were 900,000 Indian troops.
Troops in Kashmir, right?
Yeah, which is an enormous occupation.
Yeah.
The earlier, I understand in the news from last week that the framer of Kashmir's independent constitution, Mr. Krishan Dev Sethi, was the last surviving member of the Constituent Assembly from that time. Was that an effort to make an independent nation?
Yes, exactly. That was basically, it was plebiscite was to be held. There will be a UN supervised plebiscite and writ of the majority with plaque. And that representative of UN, as I said, will report to United Nations, and decision of the people will be implemented. That never happened till today. Now India says that Kashmir is its integral part, which is not the case, basically. If you go to New York and visit United Nations, and you will see map of India, Kashmir is still marked as a disputed territory. So, if you want me to start, I will continue with what I was talking about. There have been gross human rights violations. Until 2 years, 130,000 people, youth, ranging from the ages of 15 to 30, have been killed in cold blood. About 10 to 15,000 women have been gang raped. There have been mass graves. There are 15 to 20,000 people who are missing, and their spouses are running from pillar to post to know the whereabouts of their husbands. They are called as half widows because they don't know whether they are alive, still languishing in Indian prisons, or they are dead. And since I don't know how much time I have, but since on August 5th, 2019, there was a law 370, which linked India to, that was a link until the plebiscite will take place between India and Kashmir. The rule 370 was that nobody outside Kashmir, if he is not a Kashmiri, can buy property in Kashmir. And 35A, that no non-Kashmiri will get a job in Kashmir. But that was to be decided by the Constituent Assembly. What the present government, the fascist government, who is totally anti-Muslim and responsible for annihilating hundreds and thousands of Muslims in India, abolished this law. Now, this could be done by Constituent Assembly. But what they did was, they took away statehood of Kashmir and made Kashmir as a union territory. And now Kashmir is being ruled directly from Delhi. And what's going on is they are grabbing the land so that they can get their RSS, the extremist gundas, to Kashmir to settle them, to harass the local population. Any land, if I have a land there, and security forces can come to me and tell them that we need it for security forces, security activities, and they can grab the land. They are grabbing the commercial establishments, all the from middle to high level of police officials in Kashmir are people from rest of the India. Kashmir is right now a huge concentration camp. Only difference in Bosnia and Kashmir is that at that time in Bosnia, people were behind barbed wires. Here they are in the houses. It is a colony. People have no rights. They have turned Kashmir into garrison town. They can kill anybody with impunity, which they are doing. And if they suspect, least that there is a freedom fighter hiding in the house, they don't basically blast that house. They blast the whole area. They have attacked the hospital. They have beaten the patients. And they are threatening the government officials that if they report any incident, they will be punished.
Mm. Well, Dr. Khan, we're going to come back to you in just a second. This is a really horrific situation, and obviously one of the themes running through it is the lack of implementation of international plan for a plebiscite. Or we're going to be speaking now about Western Sahara, where international plans for referendum have been stalled in a very similar way. It's a very troubling trend of failure on the part of the United Nations. So I wanted to bring into the conversation Susan Smith. Susan, I've known for a number of years and serves as Director of Operations at the Fellowship of Reconciliation's USA branch, and was intentional resident of the multi-faith community of living traditions at Stony Point Center from 2014 until through last year. She is the former principal of 3 Islamic schools. She has worked at the United Nations Department of Information and the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, and has worked and volunteered doing refugee resettlement and sanctuary work in Palestine, Jordan, Turkey, the Western Sahara, Algeria, and the United States. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much, Adam. So nice to see you again. And also, salam to you, Dr. Khan. It was really interesting for me to listen to you speak. And as you went through the history of Kashmir, it dawned on me that what Dr. Khan was describing is really textbook. The same strategies, the same tactics used in Kashmir were also used in Western Sahara, in Palestine. I mean, Dr. Khan mentions Lord Radcliffe and the situation of Palestine. It's Lord Balfour. You know, so there is always this Western involvement that prevents international law from being followed through. But please, I didn't mean to cut off your question, Adam. I just really wish to reflect and associate myself with the words that Dr. Khan described. They're really textbook.
Yeah, and you know, I think for those viewers who may not know, it'd be good to go back and give a little history, as Dr. Khan also did. Since the Spanish withdrawal from the Western Sahara in 1976, it might be good to hear about Morocco's relationship with that area and just about what's been happening since.
Yeah, and if I could take one step backward, if we think of the people of the Western Sahara and why they are a unique people, similar to why our Kashmiri is different from Indians, there were 2 large successive waves of migration from the Arabian Peninsula in the 9th and in the 13th centuries. And so the people who settled in the area of the Western Sahara were actually very insular, and they preserved their language, their culture, their food. I mean, the way they speak their language, for example, and we know that language is one of the signs or indicators of a specific culture or a national identity. The Sahrawi people speak a form of Arabic that is closest to the Quranic Arabic. And Morocco, by contrast, speaks a language that is greatly adulterated by French, Spanish, and of course, the Moroccan people themselves speak Daraj or Berber dialects. So just to give that context, we're talking about a distinctly unique people who then, since the end of the 1800s, late 1800s, Spain occupied and colonized Western Sahara. Spain rescinded its claim on Western Sahara in 1975. Mauritania did shortly thereafter. And then we had, in the end of the 70s, Morocco digging in, saying that this hinterland, so to speak, was actually part of historic Morocco. And shortly after that, the Kingdom of Morocco under King Hassan II sent in hundreds of thousands of Moroccan nationals, and most of them were poor. Many of them were even homeless, all of them struggling to eat, and saying, we'll give you a meal ticket. And many of them even got housing. So just pack your bags and go into the Sahara and do your Western Sahara and do your national duty and homestead there. And this is very similar to what we also saw with Palestine. And in particular, after the Holocaust, Palestine was billed as a country without a people, which was entirely incorrect. I mean, even National Geographic in an article from the early 1900s states that the Palestinian presence in that region goes back more than 5,000 years, while the Judaic traditions go back less than that. So with this Masira, it was called, which is like the Great March, there were waves of Masiras. So since 1978, 79 until today, similarly to the settler colonialism of what we see in Palestine, what actually happened then is we see facts on the ground change. So the demographics, now we have a situation in Palestine, which in 1907, the British Mandate did a census, and they found that 7% of Palestine was Jewish. And in the late 1970s, that region was more than 90% Sahrawi, as opposed to Moroccan in the Western Sahara. But now, 30 years later, or today, we find that the Palestinian land has been chipped away throughout the years through successive wars against the Palestinian people, wars against the Sahrawi people. And in Palestine, for example, just before the election of Biden, the Netanyahu government pushed through a new settlement that essentially cuts off Jerusalem from Bethlehem, which are only 6 kilometers apart. I mean, they're basically the same heart and soul. Jerusalem and Bethlehem, they belong together, as it makes so much sense if we think of the history of Jesus and where Jesus was born, and et cetera, and the connection to Jerusalem. So now what we have is a similar situation in both Western Sahara and Palestine. And what I'm hearing from Dr. Khan in Kashmir is where all of the indigenous parties simply are saying we have many, many historic documents, international law, UN documents, UN Security Council resolutions, General Assembly resolutions, and the UN, the Fourth Geneva Convention, rather, all of them saying, give us our rights, and in particular, the right to self-determination. Yet the United Nations does not have the political will to implement those resolutions in all three of these cases. And the indigenous people of those lands just say, please, implement the resolutions that you said you would.
Now, I'm hearing the triumph of nationalism, the kind of manifest destiny that we saw in the US as Americans moved west and forced out the indigenous population, Trail of Tears and all. So with this pattern repeating in many places and the UN's inability to enforce these, or unwillingness to enforce its own laws, I wanted to ask you about your time working with MINURSO. Just a little while ago, we had on the screen an image from MINURSO's website. So could you tell us what it is and what you did at that time?
Well, part of the MINURSO mandate was setting up a voter commission to set up a referendum so that the indigenous people of the Western Sahara, and this was also championed by the Organization of African States and even people like Nelson Mandela, they set up a voter registration commission whereby two sheikhs, Sahrawi sheikhs, who knew generation after generation, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, throughout this, recent history and even centuries, they would be able to say whether or not someone was an authentic Sahrawi or not. And so Morocco vetted one of these sheikhs, and the Sahrawis would vet another. And many times coming together, to verify and vet that people belong to a certain tribe, and in each tribe there were clans and families. It was not uncommon that when the Moroccan sheikh and the Sahrawi sheikh came together, these were brothers, these were cousins, sometimes even father and son, who somehow through the years of war and the domination and colonialism imposed by Morocco became separated. And so sometimes the voter registration process would start with tears and hugs, with a reuniting of these family members separated by war. They would ask the people coming to say that they were Sahrawi, what's your father's name? What's his father's name? There were about 20 questions to verify. And the UN would have a voter registration commission. I served as a voter registration officer, essentially translating the answers of the people presenting themselves to vote in the referendum to a lawyer who was posing the questions and would make the determination based on the sheikh's input. And the sheikhs, whether or not they came from Morocco or whether they came from the Polisario or the Sahrawi government, most of the time they would both agree, because the fact is the fact and the truth is the truth. And if somebody's brother or cousin from this tribe or clan or family, there's nothing you can do to deny it, and everybody knows it. And that is exactly why the Sahrawi people are asking, simply please implement the voter registration process for the referendum. It began in 1991, but by 1995, about 5 years later, it had shut down. And the reason is because Morocco kept pushing people before the commission who were Moroccan and were not Sahrawi. So either one or both of the Sahrawi sheikhs, and usually both because they know the truth, would say this person is not a Morocco, but also sometimes the Moroccan representative, the Sahrawi sheikh that they put forward, you could tell he was under duress and pressure because Morocco is a very oppressive regime, and that is known historically from King Hassan II, and they have spies and they use disappearances and put people in prison. Many of the oppressions that Dr. Khan was talking about in Kashmir are used in the Western Sahara as well. But nonetheless, the bottom line is the Sahrawi people clearly believe, as they entered into this agreement with the Kingdom of Morocco under the auspices of the United Nations, just hold the referendum and let the people decide, let the people have the right to self-determination, which is their right under international law, human right. So since about 1995, the talks broke down, primarily because Morocco kept sending bogus applicants. The Sahrawi independence movement, the Arab Democratic Arab of the Western Sahara would say, no, this person's not legitimate. Talks would break down. In the meantime, and very similar to what's happening in Palestine, the waves of settler colonialism continue. And that's history repeating itself.
Dr. Khan had also mentioned human rights abuses, and the abuses taking place in Western Sahara. Also, I understand. I recall from the 1990s a prison called Tasmamert, where a lot of Sahrawi leaders were being held in terrible conditions for years and years. It was a dungeon, and many died that way. In more recent years, human rights activists, both Sahrawis and outside international observers, have been mistreated and refused access. I understand MINURSO also has not been allowed to investigate certain things, or there have been delaying tactics. So this is very different from the propaganda that the government has spread. And of course, the reason is also financial and economic, because of the rich raw materials in the Sahara, which unfortunately are not benefiting the local population at all, as far as I know. So I wanted to ask about now to make some connections between these rather horrible situations, getting towards what can be done in the international community, building a movement of solidarity, using tactics that could get us past the gatekeepers. In the UN, India is now on the Security Council, so they're sure to block any kind of discussion, but there wasn't much going on in the Security Council for Kashmir anyway. So Dr. Khan, where in the UN system do you see potential for work, for constructive action, and should we be using this self-determination concept to advance the goals?
Well, as far as UN is concerned, it has been defanged. It's a paperless tiger. UN is only used by superpowers when they want to implement their agenda. And for powerful countries like India, UN doesn't have legs to stand on. Now, we have submitted paper after paper describing the violations by Indian security agencies, mentioning in detail the murders these security forces have committed. There is a comprehensive book, 900 pages, where till 3 years ago, each and every case of murder, rape, torture, so on and so forth has been documented. We have given it to passed it to United Nations. Maximum what United Nations does is they tell, for example, in the case of Kashmir, that they want to send their delegation. India says, no, we will not allow you. And that's the case ends. And UN raises hands and basically says, depicts helplessness. Unless and until India, there's a pressure on India that if it continues with the violations, they will have to pay. There will be consequences. They will continue their agenda. Now, India, because of its stand against China, is becoming darling of the West. Billions and billions worth of arms are being provided to India, intelligence and so on and so forth. Unless there are consequences, there are some kind of sanctions. India will not relent. They will continue with their agenda, which is to make demographic changes in Kashmir so that there is a Hindu majority, and tomorrow, if they want to hold the plebiscite, it will be decided in their favor. So unless United Nations, you tell me what has United Nations done in so many years? Unless, like in Iraq or other countries, that's when which America wanted to do it. For smaller countries, for like Kashmir or Western Sahara, Susan, they will not take any decisions unless the big powers like America, especially United States of America, wants them to do it. You adopt any resolution against India in the Security Council, it will be basically vetoed. People have to, it is a time people have to rise up. They have to boycott Indian goods, which will take a lot of time. And especially speaking from the standpoint of United States, you know it how things look in this country. The politicians don't do any senators, congressmen. You have to put a lot of money in their kitty. Then they will speak.
I wondered about a special envoy. Has there ever been a special envoy from the Secretary General's office or a special rapporteur that's been, even if they're not allowed into the territory, can raise awareness?
Well, it does. The problem with Kashmir is that now it hurts to me to say that India, because of a lot of power and money and the business interests of America and Europe in that region, has been able to shift the narrative of the Kashmir problem. Now, if a senator or congressman in this country speaks, they talk about human rights violations. A statement from a lowly employee in state government talks about human rights violations. Human rights violations should not happen, but these are symptoms of the underlying problem. It is like you are trying to cure the symptoms without taking care of the disease. Unless you address the issue of self-determination, the human rights violations will continue. The problem is
That's a very good point, Doctor, about symptoms. And I'm getting a message from our producer that we need to take a 10-second break just for station identification. So just hold on 1 second. We'll be off screen just for a second. We'll be right back with UN This Week. And Adam Carroll with UN This Week with Dr. Imtiaz Khan and Susan Smith discussing self-determination of Kashmir, Western Sahara, and Palestine. And very difficult issues. And so political will, we're talking about the need for that. And I was wondering, Susan, how about your view reflecting on what Dr. Khan has been saying?
I completely agree with Dr. Khan is saying, and I think this discussion, we've just touched the surface. There are so many levels and layers that I'm sure Dr. Khan and I would like to go into. But as this program is coming to a close in a few minutes, I think a perfect segue from what the doctor was talking about is to look at the status of the COVID-19 virus in these three countries and how people are being treated and how they are not given the vaccine. So, for example, Israel has been lauded with the status of being one of the top countries in the world to respond and roll out the vaccine faster than any other. However, that is with the exception of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, with the exception of East Jerusalem, because Israel treats East Jerusalem with a different status. And so if you can imagine Gaza, the largest open air prison in the world, and the people in the West Bank under repressive conditions. And as a reminder, in Gaza, they don't even have electricity for more than 4 to 6 hours a day. Only last week did Palestine finally, through Russia, secure an agreement that Russia would sell them the Sputnik 5 vaccine. Here we are in 2021, and this is the first that Palestinians in the occupied territories have a hope. I mean, certainly if you're a Palestinian living in this extremely packed Gaza Strip with millions of people, COVID is spreading rampantly. It's the perfect place for the disease to spread. Same situation in the Western Sahara. The Sahrawis are not being, in occupied Western Sahara, they're not being provided with the vaccine. And those who are in Algeria, in Tindouf, which is a garrison city in the south of Algeria, where the 4 Sahrawi refugee camps are. Now, because they are, small and contained, some women from the NOVA organization, Nonviolent Sahrawi Women's Association, they said that they had a few cases and everyone was told, in the nearly 200,000 people in these refugee camps, to stay in your tent. And they were, able to manage it, but not because of any, help from outside. And when we think too of the lauded Abrahamic Accords, this, unilateral agreement to normalize relations between Israel and the United Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, those agreements were immediately followed up with multi-billion-dollar arms sales agreements by the United States. Nothing in any of those agreements with Israel from those 4 Arab countries mentioned Palestine. Nothing. And, of course, Palestinian has political aspirations, but even something humanitarian, such as, and Israel agrees to supply the COVID vaccine and medical equipment and open up hospitals, etc., to help the Palestinians recover from COVID. It's none of that. So that to me just shows you very clearly that the intentions of Israel, the intentions of the 4 Arab countries, and the intentions of the United States as the primary broker clearly did not have Palestinian lives at stake. And this is, and Dr. Khan,
that's really shameful.
It is, and these are populations.
And just to say, go ahead.
Just that these are populations that have signed agreements like the Oslo Accord or the, the MNORSO mandate from the UN in good conscience, only to see that the opposite, there's this UN legislation that's lifted up that's supposed to create peace. Nothing happens. In fact, things get worse. And then people get very upset. And throw COVID in it. It's a hopeless situation. And until there's some goodwill and applying the international resolutions, General Assembly, UN, et cetera, that have been promised, such as the referendum, until international law is followed, we can only see people get more desperate, particularly with people dying with COVID.
Yes. So Dr. Khan, just as an immunologist, we're all hoping that you'll hook us up with some vaccines too. But as far as the impact of isolation and disenfranchisement, occupation, and now the pandemic, how is Kashmir doing these days?
Well, Kashmir thing is that with the COVID, you have to have testing. And unless you have the testing, you don't know how rampant the virus is. In Kashmir, what is going on since last few months, young people as young as 17 years of age, they are dying of heart attacks. Suddenly, there is a person who had just graduated from the university, and he died suddenly from the heart attack. And as you know, this virus results in clots, and these clots can go anywhere. They can go to the heart, they can go to brain, and person dies. Unless there's a testing, you don't know that they were COVID positive. COVID doesn't cause one symptom. It can cause wide variety of symptoms. And the testing in Kashmir is not taking place. And the problem is that with 900,000 forces who come from other different parts of the country, who go and leave, are placed constantly. And many times it is suspected they are bringing this virus. And they don't basically implement social distancing. And that could be the reason the virus is basically spreading faster than any other country. And without the testing take place like they are doing in India, you don't know how rampant the disease is. Like even in this country, with the most advanced medical facilities, you cannot say 2 million. It is amongst those people who have been tested, they are positive. But this is a country of 330 million people. It is not possible to test everybody. You are labeling those many cases which you have tested. So in Kashmir, when there is no testing taking place, and people are dying suddenly, you don't even know people died of COVID. And as far as, like Sister said, the vaccination, it is not coming there, and there's the plan. And moreover, in Kashmir, there may be, I think, 10 or 12 ventilators in whole Kashmir, and I don't know how many of them are working. So if somebody has basically very symptomatic respiratory distress, there are not enough ventilators to put people on those so that they can survive. So situation is abnormal, and even hospital infrastructure in Kashmir is in a dilapidated state. So that basically, you call that, at least in this country, other countries, the deaths are accounted for. There in Kashmir, the deaths are not accounted. We don't know how many died of COVID. And we don't know how many will further die. And without knowing what they died from.
I'm really sorry. And, I think, we have to think about people, maybe your relatives who are in that situation. And so I think with all these crisis situations, we've got to push the UN to do better. If our viewers want to contact any of our guests, please contact us at UN This Week, and we can put you in touch. We have to end the show, but we do also have an event coming up this Friday with Dr. Imtiaz, because it will be Kashmir Day. It's up on the screen there. Here it is. It's Kashmir Solidarity Day, virtual webinar, many excellent speakers, as you can see. and including Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. So very important issue that we hope will get more attention and more action, and not to give up hope, for these quite big challenges. So our hearts are out there, our thoughts are and prayers are with the people of Western Sahara, Palestine, Kashmir, and all the other oppressed peoples of the world. So again, thank you all very much. Stay safe and stay tuned.
Thank you for having us.